everyone. I'm Ashi and I'm into ThoughtWorks since about last 2.5 years. And I'm acting as an infrastructure consultant over here. So today I will go through this authentication and authorization section. And as most of you must have already aware about it and must have already used it, but we'll just cover some basics around it. Okay? So, authentication and authorization are the two distinct security processes in the world of the identity and access management. Generally, people have a myth that they both are the same, but actually, it's not. They both are very different processes, which are whose main aim is different and which are based totally upon different frameworks and the protocols. So, in the layman's term, we can say authentication is confirming users are who they say they are. So, for example, in the image also, you can see that authentication is always the first step. So, for example, whenever you are logging into any application, into web application, or let's say any mobile application, any social media account, everywhere you must have seen this, like you are authenticating yourself. So this always comes up as the first step. And without it, I will say that your application is complete if it's not having an authentication. Okay. Whereas authorization, it comes at a much later part and it used to verifies whether a user has a permission to access a particular resource or not. So it basically gives the user a permission to access a resource. For example, you can have access to like two resources, but not a third resource. So let's consider a normal life scenario, like how you can compare it with our real life. So let's say he wants to onboard a flight, and so at the airport you have to show your ID, right, at the entry gate. So that is where the authentication used to happen, because your ID is matched, and then but if your ID is authenticated, then only you are allowed to enter the airport premises. Okay, so that is where the first step, the authentication, is happening. Now once you are authenticated, now let's say you have to onboard a flight and you have a, let's say, Air India boarding pass. Then you can't board a Indigo flight because that is your authorization. For example, you can't with whatever permissions you have, you can't go to the another flight. So that you can consider as an authorization. For example, you can only board the Air India, not the Indigo. So in the same fashion, if we consider some example related to our industry, so you can see, for example, in our offices as well, at the entry gate, you have your card system where you used to authenticate yourself. But then inside it, it might be that only few people are allowed to the server room, but not the others, right? So that is where the authorization is happening, that even the authenticated users all are not allowed to all the rooms or to all the places. So, same is implemented in the world of the identity and access management through the use of different engines, different tools and techniques. So, let's uh, read more about authentication now. Just in case you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A section. Our my colleagues will try to answer them, and yeah, uh, as there is any question. So let's try to understand the authentication. So it's an act of validating that the users are who they claims to be. And it's the first step in any security process, as we have already discussed. Now, there can be different types of authentication. So, for example, first and simple one is the single factor authentication. And this is the one which is a normal, in which you just enter your username and password and you're authenticated. Although this is a weak one, because anybody who knows your password, they can log into your system, or anybody even by brute force, they can know your password and they can claims to be as you are. So they can attack your system and they can log in. So in order to enforce more security for the authentication, you can either have the two-factor authentication or the multi-factor authentication. So when we say two-factor or the multi-factor, it means there are two or many methods of authentication. And when we say many methods, it can involve different types basically. So in the different types, it involves like something which you know. For example, your password, or like this, or some pin, it can be, right? Then comes something you have. So it generally involves the mobile phones. For example, you can have some app installed on your mobiles, like Authenticator app, which can publish some code which you have to enter in order to authenticate, or some notification comes on your mobile, or some code used to come on your email. So that is something which you have. And third, the most secure one is something which you are. For example, you can use your thumbprint, which is, or your fingerprints, which are unique. So that is the more secure way. Or even your facial expressions to unlock something, or even your retina scan. So now even there are many applications which in which you have this type of authentication. A real life scenario can be your bank account. So whenever you do a net banking or whenever you log into your bank application, then you enter your username and password, and then you are prompted for an OTP, right? So that is where the double factor, or you can say multiple factor authentication is happening. In today's world, this authentication is generally governed by the OpenID Connect protocol. So this is a protocol which is used by all the open source provider nowadays, which is very popular. And via this, you can just implement the authentication without duplicating all your code. So I will talk a little bit about this in the coming up slides, just after like 1 or 2 slides. Okay. Let's talk about the authorization now. So authorization is the process of giving the user permission to access a specific resource or a function. It always follow authentication. It's always a best practice, and we never do authorization before the authentication, because if a user itself is not valid, you can't give that user the permission to access a resource, right? So always the best practice is to have authentication first and then to have the authorization. Now, authorization can be done via multiple ways. One way is via policies, which we'll read more about in this session today. And so in different environments, you can have different ways. For example, you can have role-based access controls. For example, in the Azure, you used to have, or in the cloud, I will say, you used to have role-based access controls. You used to have IAM, you used to have policies and rules, which you can use in order to authorize a person. As authentication is governed by the OpenID Connect protocol, similarly, authorization is governed by the OAuth 2.0 framework. Okay, so let's see what is this OpenID and what is this OAuth. So there are multiple providers, open source providers in the market now, which are available, that gives you these solutions just open source, free of cost, just ready to use. So one such very popular provider is Auth0, which is authentication, open authentication provider basically. So this Auth0, for example, we have the Okta. Similar is the Auth0, which is open source. Auth0 uses the OpenID for authentication, and it uses the Auth0 2.0 framework for the authorization. So basically, these two different components are being used for the different parts. This is a solution which, for example, now developers no need to worry about the implementing the security process. They can just focus on their code, and this Auth0 will take care of everything regarding the security. You can just create a tenant over this Auth0, and in your code, basically, you can use the Auth0 SDK depending upon your language, whichever you are using, like Java or .NET or whatsoever. And just you can call the APIs and you can connect with the tenant, and it will do the authentication and the authorization on your behalf. So basically, you can delegate this work to this provider. And there are other advantages also of using this Auth0. So for example, you can just enforce the multi-factor authentication. You don't need to implement anything extra. You can just enable this thing. Also, you can have single sign-on feature. And Auth0 can also detect the malicious IPs. For example, if somebody is trying to just bombard your application, then it can just detect the malicious IP and can just block the authentication of those IPs. So it avoids the denial of service attacks as well in this way. Also, let's say if the credentials of any user are exposed to the dark web, then it can even it even knows about those, and it can block those users from authenticating. So an example of this auto providers and the others. Nowadays, you must have seen in many applications that there is an option login via the Gmail or login via Facebook. So that is where you are delegating basically your access to some different provider. So that is where internally this auto is coming into picture. So let's see a simple flow that how this auto used to work. I'm taking just a normal regular web app. So depending upon the type of your application, whether it's a mobile application or a web application or a business to business or a user to business, depending upon that, this flow can vary. So this is just a normal flow. So in which there's a user, there's a normal web app, there's a tenant of auto that we just described, and there is some API. So whenever a user clicks on the login, then that is sent to the web app, which internally this SDK, it used to redirect to the auto tenant. And then auto used to redirect it to the actual login page where user can enter the credentials like username and password. And here user also used to grant the permissions. Okay, I'm allowing this auto tenant to access my, for example, my Facebook account so that it can access the different things. So here used to grant authentication and consent. And if this authentication is valid, then this auto used to do the used to return an authorization code. Now, using this authorization code, this web app can send it to the tenant again, and it will return you an access token. Now, with the help of this access token, you can access any of the resource basically. So this is how a normal flow looks like. So now here you can see your all the authorization and authentication part has been delegated to this auto tenant. Okay. So this is a normal flow. Just summarizing this whole authentication and authorization, we have seen that authentication used to verify the credentials, whereas authorization used to grant or denies the permission. And authentication used to work via passwords or biometrics or one-time PIN, whereas authorization is something which is maintained by the security team or some admin team or central team. It can't be controlled by an individual user. It's something which is owned separately. Authentication is visible to the user because you can enter your credentials, right? And you can see the prompt in which you are entering your username and password. But authorization is not visible because it's a process of giving the permission which is implicit, which you can't see. Authentication is partially changeable by the user because you can change your password, right? And even you can remove your account. So that's why authentication is partially visible, is changeable. Whereas authorization, you can't say that I'm granting myself the access to this particular thing. In authentication, the data used to move through the use of ID tokens. Here, the ID tokens are the JWT tokens, which is JWT tokens. Whereas in authorization, the access tokens that we have just discussed in the last slide, with the help of that, the data used to move. And when we say data is moving, it means like checking whether you are able to access a particular resource or not, and then accessing that resource particularly. This all is done with the help of this access token. So yeah, I'm done with this section of the authentication authorization. For any question, just put it in the Q&A, and yeah, I'm handing it over to my colleague Pooja for taking it up to the next section.
Okay, thank you, Ashi.
Thank you.
Let me share my screen first. I hope my screen is visible to everyone. Do let me know if it's not visible.
It is visible.
Okay, great. So first of all, I am Pooja and I have been in ThoughtWorks from last 4 years. and currently working as an infrastructure consultant and working on a Azure domain. So in the last session, we learned about authentication and authorization, how those concepts are important for identity and access management. So now to create authentication and authorization into your system, people create policies for that. There are security professionals in every company which create policies. So now, just a second, guys. So in this picture, historically, policies has been created manually. There will be someone who requests a policy. There will be a business requirement which will come, and then there will be a ticket will be raised, and then there will be a compliance team sitting who will review the policy, and then it will take time to review and see if whether it's feasible for the company to do that or not, and then they will create a policy for the system. So all the system is it was manual. Historically, it has been done manually. So this system is, first of all, it's error prone. A human being is doing it. They are prone to error. But the next thing is it's difficult to manage, and it's more difficult to scale. It's easy to manage it for one account, but if you want to scale it to up to hundred and thousands of accounts, it's not possible to do it manually. So now here comes the policy as code. So now before jumping into why we should use policy as code, let's start with an example. So let's consider there is a company which serves their clients, and their company is small. They are using just one AWS account to manage their infrastructure, and they have only one security person who is managing all the policies, making sure they are following the compliance rules of the region in which they are deploying the application. So now after some time, that company grows, become a multi-million company, multi-dollar company. And then now they are serving hundreds of clients, and now they have hundreds of AWS accounts as well. So now if they do management of all the policies and management of compliance rules manually, that's almost impossible to do it. So now here comes policy as code. So policy as code gives the capability to write policy in code in a high level language to manage it and automate the creation and deployment. So all the policies, all the code of the policy, of the logic of the policy will be written in a code, which can be in a text file. So it can be, the logic can be very granular, that you want to access it to a particular region or not. It's as granular as that. So now, as a policy is written in a code, in code and in text files, all the proven software development best practice can be adapted for the policies as well, such as version control. It can be applied to policies, automated testing, automated deployment. All these things can be applied to the policies as well. So now, and there's one more thing. So while doing policy as code, anybody can decouple the policies from the application, from their platform, and from their services. It can be separated, it can be decoupled from the application so that it can be used again and again for different resources, for different platforms. So now this is this is the workflow of a policy as code. So now after policy as code, somebody will write a policy. It will go to your policy engine, and then suppose let's consider an example. I am deploying a virtual machine in Azure. Now there is a policy in my company that I cannot deploy. I can only deploy in UK region. If I try to deploy it and deploy in any other region, suppose US or in somewhere in Europe, I will not be able to. That is the policy in my company. Now suppose I am creating a virtual machine. I am trying to create it in US East. When I am submitting that request on the UI, first of all, that policy will come into picture. It will see whether that the deployment which I am triggering is adhering to the policy or not. If yes, then it will create the resource. If not, then it will fail with the error that this resource is failing for this particular of this region that is violating this policy. So that's how the policy as code workflow works. So now, guys, if you have anyone has any questions, please post it in the Q&A. My colleagues will try to answer as soon as possible. So now, before jumping into what are the different implementations, how we can see different examples, let's see how the policy engine works and what are the things we need for the policy engine. So now the thing is, policy engines require three things. The first thing is query, and the policy and the data. The policy is basically the coded logic of the policy which you want to implement. It will be the coded logic. You want to deploy it in a particular region or not. You want to restrict something. Anybody wants particular tags on the resources. All that logic will go into the policy. The next thing comes is data. Data is basically the information about your application, about your environment, about your infrastructure. All that information will go into the data. And the last thing is query. Query is basically which triggers the decision-making flow. It will the query will take the policy and the data together and see and give it to the policy engine, and then the policy engine will try to see, will try to take a decision whatever the query is it allowed or not. That's how you will get a response. So that's how the policy as code works. So now the next thing is an example. So we can implement policy as code for any application as well as any infrastructure code. So let's consider this example in which there is a HTTP API through which users can allowed to see their salary or whosoever is reporting to them. So in this example, so there is some data in which there is a data about the management, like who is reporting to whom. So there is a example like Janet is reporting to Alice, Janet and Can is reporting to Bob. So now what the policy we want to implement is that a user can only see his, or the one who is his reporting, the user can see their salary only. So this is the logic which we have written in the policy, that only a person can see their or their reportees salary. Now let's see the query. So suppose I'm making a query in which I'm passing that I am Bob. I want to see the salary of Bob. So now I'm saying I want to see my own salary. The policy will return that yes, you can see the salary. So now there's another example. So there is Alice. Alice wants to see the salary of Bob. Now the policy will first of all go to the manage data and see if Alice has the access to view the Bob's salary or not. According to this management chain, Alice does not have access because Bob is not reporting to Alice. So the answer will be false. So in this way, policy as code can be implemented for any HTTP IP or any application code as well. So this was related to application. Now let's see an example of infrastructure, how we can apply for our infrastructure deployment. So this example is where I want to deploy an app into a orchestrator. So let's see, for example, Kubernetes. And in this, there are two conditions which is related to that app, that it should follow the jurisdiction requirements, whichever is specified in the query. And the next thing is it should satisfy some PCI, that is payment card index. It's related to the payment cards of credit card information. So this is a policy which has been written in which there is an app placement in which you will pass that I want to deploy an app. These are the tags, whether I can deploy it or not, or on which cluster I can deploy. So the logic has been written here that it should have a particular tag that it should go into require EU tag or not. That is it's whether it's satisfying the jurisdiction or not. And then there is a PCI condition as well, that whatever you are trying, whatever the PCI level you are requesting, it should be higher than in the cluster. So cluster will also have some PCI level and it will be higher than that. It should be higher than that. So now this is the data. Over here, there are some information that I have 4 clusters. There are some data related to that, what are the region they are deployed and what are the tags they have. So now suppose I'm making a request, I'm making a query in which I'm specifying that I want to deploy an app which requires a PCI level of 3 and it should be deployed into EU only. So let's see how it works. So first of all, let's consider first condition, which is like it should be deployed in EU. Now when this condition will go and see, there are only 2 outputs for that, prod EU and test EU. Now the first condition, I have two answers. Now the next condition comes into picture. It says that the PCA level is 3. Now I need a cluster which has a PCA level less than 3. So now it will give me, it will see that there are two answers. I got two answers from the first requirement, which is PRODU and TESU. Now with the second requirement, when I club both of them, I get only one answer, that is PRODU, because it's satisfying my condition. So these are some examples of how we can implement policy as code for our infrastructure and for our application. The next thing is implementations of policy as code. So there are the two most common implementations of policy as code concept in the market. That is, the first one is Sentinel, which is provided by HashiCorp. They have integrated it with the Terraform. So anybody can write the policies as a code through with the help of Sentinel, and then they can apply it with the while combining it with their Terraform code. So now, like in this example, like suppose you're deploying your code through Terraform in your cloud. It can be any cloud or in the Terraform cloud. So first of all, it will deploy, and then you can create your Sentinel property. It will check whether whatever changes you are making, it's applicable to the policy, is allowed by the policy or not. If yes, then only it will apply. Otherwise, it will fail on the Sentinel policies stage. So now there is another implementation, which is OPA, that is Open Policy Agent. That is an open source general purpose policy engine, which will be discussed more in detail by my colleague in the next session, Nidhi. She will discuss this. So now I will hand it over to Nidhi to discuss this in the next session.